There is a river in North Florida where the water is the color of strong tea, and a diver working the bottom of it cannot see his own hands. 30 feet down, in that blackness, there is a hole in the limestone. Divers have been pulling things out of that hole for 40 years. A mastodon tusk with cut marks in it, stone tools, the remains of a fire. And when the dates came back, they said something that was not supposed to be possible. People were sitting on that riverbank about 14,500 years ago, which is roughly 1,500 years before the first Americans were supposed to have arrived at all. To understand why that number caused a fight, you have to know what it was arguing with. For most of the 20th century, American archaeology had one answer for who got here first, and the answer was the Clovis people. It came from Clovis, New Mexico in the 1930s, where excavators found a very particular kind of spear point sitting in the ribs of animals that went extinct at the end of the Ice Age. Long, fluted, unmistakable. Then those same points started turning up everywhere, from Arizona to Pennsylvania, and always at roughly the same depth and time, about 13,000 years ago. So the story wrote itself. A single wave of hunters crossed the land bridge from Siberia, walked south through a gap in the ice, and spread across 2 empty continents in a few centuries. It was clean, it fit the evidence anyone had, and it hardened into something close to law. Archaeologists gave it a name that tells you everything about how it worked. Clovis First. And Clovis First did not just describe the past, it policed it. If you dug a site and came back with a date older than Clovis, you had a problem. And the problem was not the artifact, it was you. Careers ran aground on this. Dig a pre-Clovis site, and the response was not curiosity. It was an assumption that you had made a mistake, contaminated your sample, misread the layers, mistaken a broken rock for a tool. Sometimes that was true. Plenty of claimed early sites really did fall apart under scrutiny, and the field had good reason to be strict. But strictness has a way of becoming something else. If every date that disagrees with the model gets thrown out, the model can never be wrong. It just gets quieter. That is the wall the Osceola River ran into. The site is called Page Ladson. The name comes from a diver named Buddy Page, who first pointed archaeologists at the spot, and the Ladson family, who owned the land along that stretch of river. Page had been diving the Osceola for fossils. He kept coming up out of one particular sinkhole with mastodon bone, and he told a scientist at the Florida Museum of Natural History that there was something down there worth a proper look. The proper look started in 1983 under a paleontologist named David Webb, and it went on, season after season, into the 1990s. You have to picture the working conditions because they matter. The Osceola is stained almost black by tannins leaching out of the swamps it drains. Divers describe it as working inside coffee. Visibility at the bottom is measured in inches, and often there is none at all. So the excavation was done by touch. Divers went down with lights that barely helped, laid out a grid on the floor of the sinkhole, and dug the way you would dig on land, one careful layer at a time, except 30 feet under a river, in the dark, by feel. Sediment went into bags and came up to a barge for screening. Every artifact had to be recorded in 3 dimensions by people who could not see the site they were mapping. It is one of the strangest archaeological digs ever run in North America, and it produced one very awkward object. Among the bones they brought up was a mastodon tusk, and the tusk had marks on it. They were not random scratches, and they were not the gnawing of another animal. They were a series of deep, parallel cuts near the base, the kind you make when you are cutting a tusk out of a skull, which is something a person does with a tool for a reason. A tusk is several hundred pounds of usable ivory, and pulling it free of a dead animal is worth the effort. Alongside the tusk, in the same sediment, were stone flakes shaped by human hands. Webb's team dated the layer and got numbers older than Clovis. They published. And the field, doing what the field did, largely set it aside. Underwater site, difficult conditions, sediment that could have shifted, not proven. The tusk went into a museum drawer, and the argument went quiet for 15 years. In 2012, two archaeologists decided the site deserved a second trial. Jesse Halligan of Florida State University and Michael Waters of Texas A&M went back to the same sinkhole with better equipment and a much harsher standard of proof. They knew exactly what the objection had been, so they set out to close it. They re-excavated. They mapped the layers to show the sediment had been laid down undisturbed, in order, not churned by the river. They pulled up a stone knife with a sharpened edge. They collected new samples for dating from material that could not have drifted in. Then they ran 71 radiocarbon dates. The answer came back the same as before, only now it was nailed down. People were at that spot about 14,550 years ago. In 2016, they published it in Science Advances, and this time it held. There is a detail from that site that I keep thinking about, because it is smaller than the tusk and says more. In the same sediment, the team found mastodon dung, preserved in the airless muck at the bottom of the sinkhole, still holding what the animal had eaten. Inside it were the seeds of wild squash. That tells you the swamp these people were living in, what grew there, what the animals were eating. It is an ordinary Tuesday 14,500 years ago, fossilized. And it tells you the site is intact. Dung does not survive being tumbled down a river. If that is sitting where it was dropped, the layer around it has not moved either. Page Ladson did not fall alone. It was part of a wall coming down. Monte Verde in Chile, older than Clovis, and a long way south of it, which is a problem if the first arrivals were still walking through Canada. Meadowcroft Rock Shelter in Pennsylvania, Cactus Hill in Virginia, Paisley Caves in Oregon, and then White Sands in New Mexico, where footprints pressed into an ancient lakeshore have been dated to somewhere around 23,000 years ago. Children's footprints, among others. That last one is still being argued over, but the pattern no longer depends on any single site. Take away any one of them and the rest still stand. Clovis First is finished. What replaced it is not another tidy story. It is an admission that we do not know, and that the peopling of the Americas was earlier, probably by boat along the coast, and almost certainly happened more than once. Here is what I think is worth sitting with. The coastline those people would have traveled is not where the coastline is now. When the ice melted, the sea came up by roughly 120 meters, and the beaches they walked are somewhere out on the continental shelf, underwater. Which means the best evidence of the first Americans is almost certainly submerged, spread along a drowned shoreline thousands of miles long, in exactly the kind of place nobody can excavate. We found Page Ladson because a sinkhole happened to swallow a campsite and sealed it in mud, and because a fossil diver happened to notice. That is a lot of luck for one site. So the timeline moved. It will probably move again. For 80 years, the discipline had a date it defended, and the date turned out to be wrong, and it was wrong in the direction of people being here earlier and being more capable than we assumed. Here is the part I want you to argue with me about. The evidence that would settle this is under the ocean. So do we keep waiting for another lucky sinkhole, or do we admit the official timeline is a floor and not a fact? Pick one and defend it below. I read the comments. And if you want the history that is sitting underneath the country, that is what this channel digs up.